Tonight, the end of the road for Lord Mandelson in Parliament, but the fallout about his dealings with paedophile Jeffrey Epstein continues to escalate this evening. Breaking news in the past hour as the Metropolitan Police says it will investigate allegations against Lord Mandelson. That's after the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown and the Cabinet Office submitted evidence of possible wrongdoing.
The Clerk of the Parliament has today received notification from Lord Mandelson of his intention to retire from the House, effective from 4th February.
Earlier, he retired from the House of Lords but can still call himself Lord Mandelson. The Prime Minister says the former US ambassador let his country down, and Downing Street confirms it is looking at legislation that would strip him of his peerage. Pressure now from opposition parties and from Labour MPs too, as the future of the Prime Minister's top aide, Morgan McSweeney, comes under scrutiny. We'll be getting reaction from across the political divide over the next hour, and our duo Stephen Flynn and Theo Clark will be here for the duration. It is Tuesday. I'm Matt Barbet, live from Westminster. This is the Politics Hub. Good evening. He was ousted from Washington, is out of the Labour Party, and now Peter Mandelson is leaving the Lords. He once famously proclaimed that he was a fighter, not a quitter, but the pressure that has been mounting after days of revelations about the extent of his relationship with the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein today became unsustainable. The Metropolitan Police said in the last half hour it will investigate whether he leaked sensitive information to Epstein when he was the business secretary under Gordon Brown. The former PM and the Cabinet Office had submitted to the police material relating to those allegations. That after he resigned from the House of Lords earlier on today. Lord Mandelson is, of course, no stranger to political setbacks and subsequently somehow finding his way back into the fold. But is this now truly the end of the road for a man who's been at the centre of British politics for 40 years? Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, is live in Downing Street this evening. It looked bad last night, Sam. Worse now.
How did Labour get it so wrong? Tonight, one of the party's most famous faces across the last 4 decades is tonight facing a police investigation, has quit the Lords, but basically he was going to be pushed out anyway, so had to go, and is facing opprobrium and denunciation from across the political spectrum, not least from the Prime Minister this morning in the building behind me during Cabinet, who made clear his unhappiness in no uncertain terms, making it clear that Peter Mandelson has let the country down. So much of this, Matt, is beyond contest. Peter Mandelson has admitted that he did see his partner take payments from the disgraced financier and paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. He has admitted having a very close relationship with him, including accepting hospitality after the point at which Epstein was jailed for soliciting sex with a minor in 2008. And he has admitted to continuing to keep up campaigning for his case subsequent to that. But today has been one of the most dramatic days that we have had, that has culminated in Peter Mandelson being banished from politics forever. Here's a taste of what happened today.
Gone the first time, gone the second time, gone for good.
The Clerk of the Parliament has today received notification from Lord Mandelson of his intention to retire from the House.
Peter Mandelson has left politics and Parliament for the last time, renouncing his seat in the House of Lords rather than waiting to be kicked out. All over his repeated lack of candour about his 20-year-plus relationship with the financier and paedophile Jeffrey Epstein.
Are you embarrassed about Peter Mandelson's actions? Who's to blame for bringing him back?
Keir Starmer's anger heard behind these doors. Mandelson is a disgrace who let the country down, the Cabinet was told. His threat to pass a law to strip his peerage was the final straw. Fury over a relationship between Mandelson and Epstein that others were asking about in much more depth long before Keir Starmer.
In June 2009, did you stay at the apartment in Manhattan of Jeffrey Epstein?
I'm not answering any questions about him.
He was in jail at the time for soliciting prostitution from a minor.
And My knowledge of him is something that I regret. I wish I'd never met him in the first place.
But emails released by the US government over the weekend revealed there was so much more. Payments to Mandelson's husband worth thousands. There's no suggestion of wrongdoing from him, but also alleged market-sensitive intelligence passed straight to the paedophile financier within seconds of Mandelson receiving it. Condemnation from all sides.
They have made a grave error of judgment, despite repeated warnings.
It is quite outrageous, and people will be quite disgusted by it.
We shouldn't have had to wait all these months before he was able to sidle out very quietly and very disgracefully and resign without being sacked.
Downing Street has already handed over details of key emails to the police. Now Scotland Yard are looking at whether the law was broken.
The news that the police have launched a full-blown inquiry into Peter Mandelson will incredibly be welcomed in the building behind me, because they are desperate to take as tough a line as possible to insulate themselves from the massive fallout from the departure of Peter Mandelson. Because the charge that these guys are facing is as toxic as they come in politics, that they took a hear no evil, see no evil approach to appointing a man who has been a fixture of the Labour family for more than 4 decades.
After Prime Minister's questions, the Tories could try and force the disclosure of vetting documents prepared before Mandelson's appointment, dividing Labour MPs from number 10 in the process. The embarrassment continues. Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
Let's go back to Sam in Downing Street now. Sam, in the past few moments, as if we didn't know that Peter Mandelson really is persona non grata with the government, a spokesperson for them has said the government stands ready to provide whatever support and assistance the police need. This on top of course, the announcement of that investigation by the Met in the past half hour.
The politics of this, Matt, is that I think, as I was saying, Downing Street cannot appear to be tough enough on Peter Mandelson. The Labour Party cannot afford to be tough enough because, to be honest, they let things go for decades and decades. The amount that was in the public domain about Peter Mandelson's contact with Jeffrey Epstein was clear even before his appointment. There were stories in the Financial Times and elsewhere detailing that relationship that Labour figures decided they would turn a blind eye to. That's the politically toxic reality. That's why Number 10 are so forthright in their condemnations and vows to help the police. This is a bit of a trial of strength, and it is quite serious for the Prime Minister. And we're going to see something quite interesting happening tomorrow. Now, the Conservatives tomorrow, after Prime Minister's questions, are going to use an unusual parliamentary device. They're going to use what's called a humble address. Basically, a trick that if they get a majority in the Commons, they can force disclosure of key papers about the vetting to do with Peter Mandelson. Now, the thing is, to get that across the line, you'd need support from Labour MPs. But I've been talking to Labour MPs today. Their heads in their hands, and to a man and woman each say they wouldn't vote with the government and with Downing Street, but would vote with the Tories, or at least abstain to release this material. The government, Downing Street, tomorrow not being in command of the House of Commons over a matter of huge sensitivities to the Prime Minister, that augurs incredibly badly. I wonder whether Downing Street will go out of their way to avoid a vote at all. But if the Prime Minister's trying to look strong tonight by issuing those sort of source quotes, sort of offering to help the police, the truth is because we're going to get a test of his real strength tomorrow, and it doesn't augur well.
No, the fallout's going to continue for quite a while on this one, I think. Sam, thank you very much indeed for the time being. A short time ago, our chief political correspondent, John Craig, caught up with the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, and asked what she made of the police investigation.
I think it was inevitable. I think it is right that the police carry out this investigation, but we should not let this distract us from the fact that the Prime Minister has his fingerprints all over this. He knew all of the allegations, concerns and reports about Peter Mandelson, knew that he was a close friend and associate of a convicted paedophile, and he still gave him the biggest job in the Foreign Office at a time when UK-US relations are at a critical point. That's what he chose to do, and he's got a lot of questions questions to answer.
Which you'll no doubt put to him at Prime Minister's questions tomorrow.
Well, I could ask anything at Prime Minister's questions. I think the Prime Minister has a lot of questions to answer, and not just him, but his Chief of Staff and all the people in Number 10 who pushed this appointment. I think it is a national embarrassment. There are many people who should have been given that job or who should have been interviewed for that job, and they didn't get a chance. That's not right.
What do you think about Sir Ed Davies' call for a wider public inquiry once the police investigation's over?
I think it is important that we don't allow the Prime Minister to get off the hook and create a distraction about general things. He appointed this man. I think that's where the focus needs to be on, the person who's actually running our country, who has shown time and time again that he has very bad judgment.
What about the fact everybody's pointing the finger at his Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney? Do you have a view about him, or do you think you blame the Prime Minister?
I think that the Prime Minister has to take full responsibility, but there are a lot of questions that his Chief of Staff needs to answer. Who knew what and when? Why did the vetting go wrong? Why did they skip over lots of better qualified people and allow our country to be embarrassed in this way?
Do you think the police should interview the Prime Minister as part of their inquiry?
I think the police will make that call, but if there is evidence that shows that there is something to do with the Prime Minister, then of course, yes. But right now, I think the Prime Minister himself needs to come clean and tell us what he knew and when, and be honest about how this ever happened in the first place.
And he's got a chance to do it tomorrow?
Yes, he does.
More on this now with Labour MP for Glasgow South, Gordon McKee, who's the Parliamentary Private Secretary to the Work and Pensions Secretary. Good evening to you.
Hello.
Bet this is a bit of a surprise for you, having to talk about this to someone like me so soon into your job.
Look, I think Peter Mandelson is a disgrace. I'm disgusted and appalled by what I've read in the Epstein files, not just this weekend, but in the last few weeks and months, whether it's the emails that are just cringeworthy, whether it's the photo of him in his underpants, whether it's the tens of thousands of pounds that he received from Jeffrey Epstein and claims to have forgotten all about. I think it's a disgrace, and I'm very pleased that we brought forward this legislation today, or we're planning to strip him of his peerage. He's now resigned it, and I'm very pleased he's no longer a member of the Labour Party.
Given he'd had to quit 2 big jobs previously and all the other skirmishes he got into, surely the party was aware of his toxicity prior to this?
Well, the truth of the matter is Peter Mandelson has clearly lied and misled a lot of people. And that's what he did to the Prime Minister. That's what he did clearly to the vetting team in the government and in the Cabinet Office. And as soon as Keir, when that release came out in September, saw the nature and extent of his relationship with this awful man, he was sacked as ambassador. He was literally woken out of his bed at 6 in the morning to be sacked and told he had to come back to the country. That was the right approach. I'm very pleased now that he's no longer going to be a member of the House of Lords. He's no longer a member of the Labour Party. And I would just say, like anybody else in public life, I'm glad to see the back of him. Yeah, but you can't claim that people hoodwinked him to making him US ambassador. Like I said, his brand was well known before this. Well, so why did people like David Lammy push through that appointment? Well, as I say, Peter clearly lied and misled to people about the nature of his relationship. And actually, if you look, some of the stuff that's come out, you know, for example, the stuff in 2009 where he was sat around the cabinet table emailing Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, people didn't know about that. That was 16 years ago. I was literally in school when he was doing that. I mean, nobody had known about that at all. It's come out and it's, as I say, absolutely disgraceful. And I'm very, very pleased that he's no longer going to have any part in public life. It's interesting you were in school at the time. I'm old enough to remember it, and a lot of people remember exactly what he was like back then. So this is why it's important to understand how on earth he got back into a position where people were potentially putting their own careers on the line. That might be what pans out, to put him in such a privileged job, the best job, really, in the Foreign Office of being the US ambassador. It beggars belief to a lot of people. He's had a whole host of jobs. You know, he was the business secretary in Gordon Brown's government. You'll have seen today that Gordon Brown... Yeah, but we're talking about US ambassador. That's a peachy job. Well, sure. I mean, as his being business secretary, all of these jobs that he's had, he clearly, in retrospect, wasn't appropriate for. But, you know, he's lied to people. All of this has now come out because Jeffrey Epstein's emails have been released. We've seen his behaviour in black and white. The man was clearly a very effective liar. He lied to people in Number 10. He's lied to the country for years. He's now been found out, which is right, and we've taken all the necessary action to remove him from the House of Lords. He's no longer a member of the Labour Party, and that's, as far as I'm concerned, the end of his public life. But he's still called Lord, so there still needs to be legislation there. And we've been in discussions today about bringing forward that legislation. There's an important point here, by the way, which is not just the individual case of Peter Mandelson, which is appalling, but having a proper process where anybody in the House of Lords who's disgraced themselves, and I think in some ways betrayed the country, is right that there's a process for that person to be removed that isn't as onerous as it has been before.
I mean, look, let's be honest, there's been warnings of the necessity of that process prior to this, so perhaps parliamentarians should have dragged their heels on this.
I don't think we've dragged their heels.
Sam mentioned before there this humble address that the Tories could bring tomorrow. If that leads to more transparency of the decision-making, why wouldn't you vote for it?
Well, I haven't seen what the Tories are proposing. I don't know if they've published it, but obviously we'll look at it tomorrow. I think on vetting processes, there's a fairly legitimate and understandable point that you don't want a process where if somebody goes through it, obviously not Peter Mandelson, but another comes through it, they're worried that at some point that's going to be released in future.
Why not? Why shouldn't it be transparent?
Well, no, but in general, the vetting process, what you want to do is uncover everything in somebody's life and assess whether they're a suitable candidate. That doesn't mean they want everything in their life public if they've not done anything particularly wrong. Obviously, Peter Mandelson has. I do think in this case there is an argument for transparency, and I'm obviously not part of the conversations the government are having about how that's done, but I know that Keir Starmer and the whole team are just as shocked and appalled as I am at Peter Mandelson's behaviour and want everything to be out in the open. Obviously, the complication is at the moment is, as we've seen this evening, the Metropolitan Police are now investigating Peter Mandelson for criminal activity, which may impede some of that transparency in the short term. Obviously, I hope the police can get to the bottom of this and, if necessary, serve justice on Peter Mandelson.
Final question, are you nervous that this could be contagious for the government in particular?
Peter Mandelson is a very bad egg. He's a liar. He's misled a lot of people for a very long time. He's now finished in public life. I'm not sad to see the back of him. And I think that this is not part of a wider problem. And actually, if you look at the Tories who had their own scandal for many years, the problem is they didn't deal with it. We've dealt with it. Mandelson's no longer in the Labour Party. He's no longer a peer. And as I say, he's finished in public life in Britain.
He retired and he quit the Labour Party. He wasn't booted out. He wasn't booted out of either, was he?
Well, two things. One, he quit the Labour Party after disciplinary procedures were started against him, and he resigned as a peer today only after we said we'd bring forward legislation to kick him out.
Gordon McKee, thank you. This story is sure to feature heavily on our new late-night programme. It's called The Wrap. It's on tonight at 10, here to discuss all of today's big stories and the best of tomorrow's papers. Will be the comedian and impressionist Rory Bremner. I wonder if he's got a Peter Mandelson impression up his sleeve. And also the broadcaster Jenny Kleeman. Let's bring in our duo for this evening right now. The SNP's Westminster leader Stephen Flynn and the former Conservative MP Theo Clarke. Good to see you both. Stephen, you got what you wanted. You asked for a criminal investigation in the Commons yesterday, and that's what's happening.
Yeah, I did ask for a criminal investigation because the evidence that we were all seeing was pretty compelling, that there appeared to be insider trading from the heart of the Labour government to a disgraced financier in the States who we now know is an international paedophile. But remarkably, when I asked the Prime Minister whether he agreed with me yesterday in the House of Commons, he made a quip that only the SNP would bring this sort of thing up in the chamber, which, on reflection, I'm sure he regrets, given what's happened here today. And, I was listening very closely to Gordon, who I feel a wee bit sorry for, actually, because he's a very good new MP, and the government have put him out to defend the indefensible because Keir Starmer chose. It was his choice to put Peter Mandelson in as the US ambassador, despite knowing of his connections to Jeffrey Epstein. Indeed, I was watching video footage this morning from Jim Pickard asking him a question in January 2024 about Peter Mandelson and Jeffrey Epstein. And just a matter of months later, Keir Starmer still chose to appoint him as ambassador. This is on Keir Starmer, I'm afraid, and there's no getting away from that.
Theo, what do you think, especially given what we've just heard from Gordon McKee, effectively representing the government there?
Well, absolutely. I agree with Stephen. And what an extraordinary day. I mean, I think the Labour Party has been incredibly embarrassed. I think this is deeply damaging for the Prime Minister. I mean, when I woke up this morning, the news has changed almost every hour today in terms of breaking new news. And I think there'll be more to come over the days ahead, given the huge volume of files that have been released. Firstly, I think I felt sorry for the poor Labour backbench MP who was sent tonight to defend the government, because really there is no defence. As Stephen said very articulately, very clearly, we knew for a long time what the relationship was between Peter Mandelson and Epstein at the time. And the fact that Number 10 still chose to make that appointment, I think, raises serious questions. And we have to remember that the Foreign Secretary came out and said the vetting procedure was not followed properly. There was not the due process for appointing him as the American ambassador. It was only subsequent to Number 10 making that appointment that was the case. And I think in light of all the revelations that have come out today, I think there are some very serious questions for Number 10 to answer. And I think we do need to know what the process was. And I think tomorrow will be very difficult for the government because the order paper is now in control of the Conservative Party. That means the Opposition Day debate will be looking specifically at this issue. You heard Kemi Badenoch just there saying this will be their main focus tomorrow. They're going to want to know what Number 10 knew.
Fortuitous timing in some ways, right?
Absolutely. And I think it's going to put Labour MPs in a very difficult position because are they going to be whipped to support the government when they clearly don't want to be supporting this? And it's very damaging for them and their constituencies. So let's see what happens tomorrow. I personally think that the government will be pushed and forced into releasing more information about the vetting process. And I think in light of the criminal investigation that's been called today, we need to have that information. We need to have copies of any emails, any texts. And I do think McSweeney's relationship as well with Mandelson should be called into question. We know that he was almost speaking to him on a daily basis, working in Number 10. And, you know, at the end of the day, this is about trust in government and politicians. We have an incredibly senior former cabinet minister who was in effect the de facto prime minister, who could also have been leaking private sensitive information about markets, and that really raises very serious questions to the government today.
He's obviously got severe fallibilities. He's made some serious mistakes more than once over the years. But trying to put the party politics to one side, can you see why he was repeatedly trusted by Labour leaders across 5 decades? Because he was an operator, he was connected, he had whispered in their ear. Stephen, I think you want to answer this one.
Yeah, well, this is the point, is it not? That there was a constant rehabilitation over decades with this individual who had scandal upon scandal, relationships which were called into
but also
question.
Success upon success, politically speaking.
Yeah, but I think we collectively need to say, would anyone else who wasn't a well-connected, rich, white guy who's very funny at dinner parties, who knows you and can tap you on the elbow and have a good laugh.
Well, that's rife outside of politics as well, by the way.
But would they be protected in the way that this man has and proactively rehabilitated to the point that they get the biggest international diplomatic job that this government has to offer, despite knowing about his relationship with a convicted international paedophile? And I think the answer to that is the public will look at that and say, what on earth happens in Westminster that allows this to happen? And, you know, for Keir Starmer, he made a promise to the public that he would end the chaos, and I think we both remember the chaos all too well of the last government, that he would get rid of that and tread lightly on people's lives. He's done the exact opposite.
Stephen makes an interesting point there. Scandal touches all parties to varying degrees at different times. Of course, Gordon was going to talk about Tory sleaze there, as he did, but the point you make about the perception in this place and the perception out there is an important one right now for politics.
I think it's essential, and that's really, I think, why the public cares so deeply about this issue, because it's fundamentally about trust. We want to believe in our political leaders and that they're making the right decisions for the country, and to have a senior member of the government potentially leaking secrets. And I think something we haven't talked about yet is, what is this $75,000 that was paid to Peter Mandelson? What was that money for? If it was in the context of him potentially leaking incredibly sensitive government information, which could potentially have affected markets, this is to a senior financier who could have been using that information for his own personal gain. We need to know that. There was also $10,000 given to his husband. This is not small change. This is tens of thousands of dollars. And I think it's completely disingenuous for Peter Mandelson to say he has no recollection of where this money came from. I mean, how can you possibly be given that sum of money and not know what it was for?
Theo, I suspect you vocalised the questions the police are going to be asking right now. There'll be plenty more time to talk about everything else to do with this a bit later on. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, opposition parties up the pressure on the PM and his top aide, Morgan McSweeney, as Chief of Staff. I'll be speaking live to the Liberal Democrats live next.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
They call him the king of the jungle.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Yusra Al-Baghir has this report.
And this is what's left of it.
As a woman of colour, how did the Harris campaign speak to you?
People risk their lives to speak to us for this report.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We've just been joined by Liberal Democrats Cabinet Office spokesperson Lisa Smart for more reaction to Peter Mandelson. He's quit the Labour Party, he's retired from the Lords, still has the title though. What do you think about that?
I think it's unacceptable that somebody, when they've behaved in the way he clearly has said he wants to leave, rightly has been forced to leave the House of Lords, that they can still continue to keep their use of their title. I think the whole of the public would agree that this is not an acceptable way for our country to behave in 2026. We're, as Liberal Democrats, we're calling for a proper public inquiry into this whole fiasco.
What do you think? What would that achieve?
I think it'd look at how somebody at the very heart of government was able to leak highly market-sensitive information to somebody who is clearly not a friend of the UK. This information is clearly getting to people who are using this information to threaten government ministers at a time of real peril for our country in the financial crisis. And we think it's right that people would be called and compelled to give evidence as to how this was allowed to happen. There are really serious concerns about national security here.
Yeah.
And so that's why we're calling for a public inquiry. Just on the broader point, though, about how we have people in the House of Lords over whom there are such questions of their judgment, such questions of their conduct and whether that has been in fact criminal, it is wholly unacceptable that we are not able to remove people without individualised bits of legislation. It must surely be right in this day and age that we must reform the way we put people in the House of Lords, the way we keep them in the House of Lords, and the way we can boot them out when they've behaved in the way Peter Mandelson clearly has.
It's one of those situations where it seems to require some sort of scandal to wake people up to that fact, because we were talking with the panel before the break. The perception out in the rest of the world, as you say, the public will think, hang on a minute, why isn't this a thing already?
I completely agree. And look, most people are getting matching socks on before they leave the house, they're feeding their kids, they're paying their bills, they're not thinking about the way our constitution works or doesn't work.
Yeah.
I get that, and they're right to focus on those things. But some of us, particularly those of us who are legislators, should be thinking about these things. We as Lib Dems have been calling for reform to the House of Lords for decades since our party was founded. It is 2026 and it cannot possibly be the way that we operate, that somebody is appointed for life. They cannot really be removed unless they choose to be removed, unless an Act of Parliament is passed to remove them. We've got to be able to do better than that.
The other thing about this when it comes to party politics is the opposition parties will sniff blood and go for it in this scenario. Is that what the Lib Dems want? Would you like to see this really cause problems for the government? Morgan McSweeney to perhaps consider his position, that kind of thing?
So I always feel a bit queasy when people blame the staff around somebody. Decisions are made by the politicians, made by the elected politicians, and people, including the Prime Minister, should have the wherewithal to stand up to people who are trying to point blame at people that he appointed. So I think the buck stops with the elected politician, and it should do so. And in this case, the judgment call is surely the Prime Minister's. I think that we are not new to calling for the House of Lords and the way our constitution works to be changed as Liberal Democrats. It doesn't work how it should. There are some great people in the House of Lords, but they should be able to retire properly. We should be able to boot them out when they have provably not been acting in the best interest of the country, have brought the whole system into disrepute. Trust in politics is so important, and we are seeing people enter politics who want to divide our communities, who want to use the distrust that people have to cause division for their own ends. It must surely be better for our country for people to have more trust in politics, and we think changing the way the House of Lords works is part of restoring that trust.
Bearing in mind what you just said and what the Tories want to bring to the House tomorrow, would you vote in favour of more transparency of these vetting processes?
With gusto.
With gusto?
Absolutely.
All the Lib Dems would?
Absolutely. There must be transparency. We must be able to see how these various decisions have been taken, when links with Epstein were known, that he was appointed as the ambassador, where there are questions around criminality, that must, of course, be dealt with first, and that's a police matter, as I understand it, and that's right that that's dealt with. Yeah. That's right that that's dealt with first. But we think there should be an inquiry into how this has happened. There are really serious national security questions around how somebody was acting, not in the best interests of a country, when they were sitting around the cabinet table. And sure, I would expect everybody tomorrow who's in the House looking at the suggestion that documents be released, I would hope that they all vote in favour of that.
Lisa Smart, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Let's cross now to Central Lobby, where our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is standing by. What's the atmosphere been like there this evening, John, especially with the news that the Met is launching its criminal investigation?
Well, there is relief from both peers and MPs that Lord Mandelson has quit the House of Lords. But, of course, you could argue that the government and Lord Mandelson's problems are only just beginning. First, there's a police investigation into Lord Mandelson. And secondly, of course, the Prime Minister is going to come under intense scrutiny. Tomorrow it's Prime Minister's questions. Then the Conservatives have got an Opposition Day debate in which they're going to argue and call for what's called what they're government sources are calling a paper trail. They want all the documents regarding Lord Mandelson's appointment as ambassador to be published by the government. You would expect the government to win that vote, of course, with their big majority, but you never know. Somebody who might be able to enlighten me is Richard Bergen, the Labour MP for Leeds East.
Good evening, John. How are you?
Good evening. And, of course, very much on the left of the party. It's been a busy day. An awful lot of things happened with the police, Lords, everything else. Where do you think we stand tonight? I mean, is the Prime Minister in trouble because of course, all the dreadful things that Peter Mandelson's accused of call into question the Prime Minister's judgment in appointing him ambassador? What's your view?
Well, you look at this paper trail of emails that have been disclosed, and what is clear is that Peter Mandelson needs to face the toughest possible consequences. And I see that Number 10 has passed information to the police. But of course, this does beg huge questions, and that's why there needs to be a full and swift inquiry into exactly how Peter Mandelson was appointed as this country's ambassador to the United States of America, despite what was known at the time being known. You look at the situation that we face, and I think there really is a sickness in the heart of the culture of the Labour Party, a sickness of factionalism, where you see on the one hand in the last few weeks, Andy Burnham was blocked by the Prime Minister and by his advisers from even standing for Parliament, and yet we find out that despite all this, they paved the way for Peter Mandelson, despite his proximity to Jeffrey Epstein that was known at the time of his appointment, they paved the way and pushed him over the line into such an important position.
Who do you blame for that sickness, the Prime Minister or those around him, or both?
Well, the Prime Minister and his advisers have been pushing a factional agenda. That's why they find excuses to block people like Andy Burnham, and yet they find excuses to ignore the advice of the security services and others, including MPs, and appoint Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the United States of America, with all the problems that has caused, not just for the Labour Party and the Prime Minister, but more importantly for the country and the country's reputation.
And you talked about the consequences for Peter Mandelson. What do you think you're talking about there? A prison term if he's convicted?
Well, it's in the hands of the police now. They've confirmed that they are looking into it, so I can't comment any further on it. But we've seen the information that's come out, and it's truly appalling. And I think it opens up a window into the kind of relationship we've had between too many people at the top of our politics and the super rich. I think that Peter Mandelson, regardless of this, has always been known to have an unhealthy fascination with the rich, the powerful and the famous. And he's been involved in a number of scandals in his career previously of his own making, which meant that he resigned on 3 occasions. But the question people out there are asking is how on earth did Peter Mandelson end up, despite the warnings of so many, despite what was publicly known about the proximity of his relationship to Epstein, how on earth did he end up being appointed by the Prime Minister to the key role of ambassador to the United States of America? It's quite incredible.
Will you vote against the government tomorrow, a Tory motion calling for a paper trail to be released?
Well, I'll vote for a paper trail to be released, but there shouldn't even be a vote, because the government should just get on with it. They shouldn't be opposing the motion tomorrow. I think it'd be crazy to do so. And we need action, not excuses. We can't have a situation where the government is dragged kicking and screaming to do the right thing. What's really important is that we know exactly what happened, which resulted in Mandelson being appointed as US ambassador. So that means a paper trail. It also means knowing who pushed for it, who warned against it, and who tried to overcome those warnings.
Richard Bergen, thank you very much. Well, there you go. One rebel at least tomorrow if there is a vote. And Richard Bergen there talking a pretty harsh criticism of the Labour High Command. A sickness he's talking about. Back to you.
John, thank you very much indeed. John touched on the criminality there, or potential criminality. We'll be discussing that with the man who literally wrote the book on misconduct in a public office in a moment. Let's bring Stephen and Theo back in there. Peter Mandelson has weathered many a storm in his life. Do you think he's got any friends now?
No, and you know, rightly so. Obviously, we spoke earlier about the fact he's managed to rehabilitate himself on so many occasions, but I think even the Prime Minister himself, even Anas Sarwar back in Scotland, to put a Scottish element to this, who just a few months ago called him his old friend, Peter Mandelson, they're all trying to distance himself because they all know that this is now contagious. But the one person who isn't going to be able to outrun this story is, of course, the Prime Minister, because he's the one who put him back in the spotlight. Interesting point there, Theo, isn't it? Because a lot of people's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein is based on, did they do the right thing at the right time? Did they distance themselves from him immediately after his first conviction? Or did they, as we've seen, carry on talking to him? The same in some ways in Mandelson. Have people distanced themselves enough from him in time to save their own skins, or perhaps people have been a bit slow to do so?
Well, firstly, I agree with Stephen. I don't think he has any friends left today. And I think we forget that Mandelson resigned twice from previous governments.
Yeah.
So clearly this is a pattern of behaviour. So why the Prime Minister thought it was appropriate to appoint him to our most plum ambassador post, I find quite extraordinary, given he'd been very public about his relationship with Epstein at the time. And something we have...
It wouldn't have come out of the blue. I mean, clearly he'd been advising in some way the Labour campaign to win the election. That seems to be...
Well, that's exactly my point.
Yeah.
So that's why I think it's so damaging for the Prime Minister, because clearly Mandelson has been advising the Labour Party behind the scenes. And I think that's why it is so damaging today for number 10. And something we haven't talked about yet tonight, but two things I'd add is, firstly, I think he must be stripped of his peerage. It's not acceptable that we're still tonight calling him Lord Mandelson. Yes, he's announced in the Lords that he won't be sitting there as a peer, but that's not the same as having his title removed. And it would be quite straightforward for the government to bring forward very simple primary legislation to remove him of that. And I thought your Liberal Democrat guest made a good point about general reform of the House of Lords and how shocking it is that people convicted of criminal offences can still sit as a peer today. And the second point I make is I really think he needs to go and give evidence in the United States. He needs to go and explain exactly what it is that he knew. He needs to speak to their department. And just to say that he doesn't have any recollection of things like the money is, quite frankly, not good enough in light of today's news.
But does he? They can't subpoena him because he's a foreigner. So he doesn't have to go, does he?
But he should do the right thing. I mean, I think his position now is so untenable.
He might think it's too late for that now.
Well, I think he should do it, and I think Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor should do exactly the same. They should be doing the right thing. They have lost the trust of the public, and they should be going to the United States and talking about what they knew at the time.
As we've been discussing, the Metropolitan Police has said tonight it will investigate whether Lord Mandelson leaked sensitive information to Jeffrey Epstein when he was the business secretary under Gordon Brown at the end of the 2000s. The former PM and the Cabinet Office had submitted to the police material relating to those allegations. Joining us now is Professor of Criminal Law at the London School of Economics, Jeremy Horder, who's also written the book on misconduct in office. Good evening to you. Just tell us, when it comes to these kinds of potential allegations and charges, what the police will be looking into in particular?
Well, they'll be looking into the offence of misconduct in a public office, and that involves three main factors. First of all, the person in question must have been acting in a public capacity when they did whatever they did. So they were a minister or they were a council officer. at the time. Secondly, they'll be looking at whether there was willful wrongdoing, whether the person, the public officer, did something they knew to be wrong, essentially. And thirdly, and this is really going to, I think, be the key element, if they did do something wrong and they did it knowingly, was that something that amounted to an abuse of the public's trust? And that's quite a high threshold. So it's not as simple as saying, oh, well, I leaked some confidential material to a friend because it was gossipy or something. I mean, that's wrong, but it might not amount to an abuse of the public's trust. There would need to be something more than that.
And interestingly, just sort of speaking about the procedure of all of this, currently this evidence is somewhere else. I mean, it's on servers in the States. Does that play a part in this?
Well, there may be issues about disclosure of evidence and whether it amounts to hearsay and so on. All of these technical but very important criminal matters will be considered. We can only really speculate on what the outcome of the evidence will be. And as I say, it's a high bar for prosecuting misconduct in a public office. It really is. But I think that you are getting close to that bar if there's any evidence of corruption. For example, if someone has sought to influence a private party for their own gain. So that would be significant.
Jeremy, as I said, you've written the book on this, and I think it goes back a long way, which begs the question: how common are these kinds of allegations, and for that high bar you talk about being surpassed?
The answer is that they're not common. And the reason for that is that most parliamentary wrongdoing is dealt with through parliamentary processes, through excluding members. And now, of course, we have the power sometimes to dissolve an election and hold it again in some circumstances. So there are lots of remedies around. And prosecuting someone for an offence with a maximum life penalty is not something to be taken lightly. Having said that, an example where the offence could easily have been used in recent times was in relation to some of the expense scandal abusers back in 2009-10. Now, as it happens, some MPs were convicted of false accounting and went to prison for that. But it could easily have been that they were charged with misconduct in a public office. So it can happen, even at the highest level.
I think you've answered my next question, which was, what is the penalty? I mean, prison is an option when it comes to allegations like this.
Well, it's not only an option, but I think in serious cases, you're looking at a presumption of a sentence of imprisonment of some kind. That has been the experience when we've seen it being prosecuted, this offence, which mostly it is in cases of prison officers and police officers who behaved in a corrupt way, for example. That's a very common use of this offence. So in a serious case, yes, you'd be looking at imprisonment for a period of time.
Jeremy Horder, really appreciate hearing your insights and expertise on this. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, let's get more reaction. Earlier I spoke to Sam White, who is a special advisor, a SPAD, in the Treasury to Alistair Darling and Keir Starmer's former Chief of Staff. Here's what he had to tell me a bit earlier on. Tell us about your memories of the sort of late 2000s when you were working for Alistair Darling and, of course, Peter Mandelson was in the government at the same time.
Yeah, it was a very dicey time for those who could remember it. The global banking crisis looked like it was going to topple one institution after another and potentially drag the whole of the banking network down, which on one level might not sound like it affects people's lives. But we would have discovered that bank cards stopped working, turned up at the supermarket trying to buy some food and found out you weren't able to use any electronic money. Basically, the whole thing would have ground to a halt, which would have had a huge impact on people's day-to-day lives and people's confidence in the system. So it was very dicey, and the decision that Alistair Darling and Gordon Brown and others made to intervene to prevent the collapse of the banking system and then subsequently to mitigate the impacts of the following recession off the back of that were very, very important, very high wire acts. And at times we were dealing with very confidential information that, if it leaked, could have been very damaging to some financial institutions, probably quite useful to some market speculators.
The upshot of the banking crisis was the Labour government at the time wanted to impose limits on bankers' bonuses. We also now find out that Jeffrey Epstein was urging Peter Mandelson to lobby your old boss, Alistair Darling, to change that policy. Do you remember that?
I mean, the banks were playing hardball in their negotiations, as is their right and duty to their shareholders. So I don't see any problem with that. What is disappointing is someone who you thought was on your own side and privileged to the conversations you were having behind closed doors, private meetings in the Treasury or Number 10 or around the cabinet table, was giving advice to banks to, I think the phrase was, mildly threaten the Chancellor. That's not okay. That is undermining government policy. I think you'll have seen from it that Alistair Darling did see things through and did do what he thought was right on that piece of public policy intervention around bankers. And, he stood up to the sort of, mild, threatening nature of bankers and wouldn't be sort of bullied into pulling his punches on that. So, I think it was very disappointing, but I don't think it changed government policy.
At that time, there would have been what felt like robust exchanges of views between cabinet members, wouldn't there? I mean, that would have been par for the course. And I guess at that time as well, everybody knew Peter Mandelson was a mercurial individual who was good at persuading people of his own point of view.
It's true. I mean, no one is under any illusion that Peter wasn't a sort of tricksy hobbit in these things. But, now everyone is saying, isn't it dreadful what Peter's done? And it is, but it shouldn't be understated either that he was a very important part of that government and did help bring some rigour to the operation, including the election campaign, and was, very important in the Department for Business, working on industrial policy. I think he was quite a talented, competent operator, and colleagues valued his opinion. I remember sitting in the National Economic Council that Gordon Brown created, and Peter would speak last and he'd lean in and speak quietly and everyone would lean in with him to catch every word. He was an important part of this, which is in some ways why it's so disappointing to discover that, private conversations that do legitimately, as you say, Matt, happen behind closed doors, and you can have a very robust conversation about what is the right strategy to deal with, a financial crisis, to deal with recession, to deal with many of the knock-on effects of employment and housing. But those are private conversations, and it is never okay to pass those, particularly, verbatim to individuals who might stand to profit from them.
But Sam, because he was so good at one part of his job, did that mean people had a blind spot about him? Because again, if we're thinking about the late 2000s, he already had 2 resignations behind him, 2 sizable scandals and many other skirmishes as well. Was that an issue? And has that still been an issue more recently as well with his appointment as UK ambassador to Washington, DC? Blind spots?
So I think Peter, is a complicated character. I don't think anyone thought he was, a sort of doe-eyed Bambi type character. They knew he was a talented man who came with a lot of baggage. And I think that was true of Gordon Brown era Peter Mandelson and sort of present day sort of Peter Mandelson appointed again by this government. He has talent, and people often look at the balance of risks in making an appointment. What I can say with absolute confidence is if Keir Starmer, and anyone who knows him would know this about him, had known the stuff that has become public domain in the last sort of 48, 72 hours via the Epstein files, there is no way he would have appointed him ambassador. I feel that the balance of risks that the government assessed it on and the vetting office had access to did not reflect the true picture. And I know people in Number 10 feel that the assurances they were given were false and they were badly let down by him.
Well, we last saw Sam Coates in Downing Street. He's hot-footed it here, although he says his feet are absolutely freezing. Our duo, Stephen Flynn and Theo Clark, are still with me as well. Sam, let's look ahead to tomorrow, because it was quite a few hours ago now you got wind of what the Conservatives were planning to do.
OK, there's a techie bit of what I'm about to say, but it's actually really, really important, so bear with me. Tomorrow, the Conservatives control what happens in the Commons, and they're going to put a thing to a vote called a humble address. Now, what that allows to happen, if it's passed by a majority of MPs, is you can force disclosure of documents, and they're going to ask for the disclosure of all the documents relating to Peter Mandelson's appointment. Fair dues. Now, that can only pass the Commons if Labour MPs either abstain en masse or 80+ vote with the Conservatives. I've been around Portcullis House today. I've talked to a lot of MPs. I've talked to members of the government. There is no willingness amongst Labour MPs to stand up to their own government on this. The rebellion, if this is put to a hard test, would be massive and unsustainable on an issue that ultimately goes to the Prime Minister's authority. So here's what I predict happens next. I think the government whips will do whatever they can to not have a vote tomorrow. And then those documents, well, there'll be a sort of legal battle over whether or not they're released. But that's not the real significance, Matt. The real significance is that on a matter of the Prime Minister's authority, he cannot command a majority of the House of Commons. And I just want to remind you that a Prime Minister serves because they can command a majority of the House of Commons. I'm not saying that anything happens tomorrow, but it is the majority in the Commons that gives the Prime Minister the right to form His Majesty's government. And tomorrow he will not be able to win a vote on his own authority. It is not fatal, but it is important. It is a sort of depth charge explosion under the ocean that will probably not get the coverage that it deserves and will not be seen for the significance that it is, but it will play out, mark my words.
And if it plays out, Theo, is Sam talking about something like a confidence vote at some point down the line then?
Well, we'll have to see what happens after tomorrow. But I think Sam's absolutely right. I mean, if I was a backbench Labour MP, how could you possibly vote to not support the Conservatives' motion tomorrow? I mean, I think constituents are going to be rightly incredibly angry. They're going to be flooding their inbox to say, you need to be taking a stand, you need to say enough is enough, this is not acceptable.
Yeah.
And to be fair to the Conservatives, they played a blinder because by having control of the order paper tomorrow, they have put all of these Labour backbench MPs in an incredibly difficult position.
Yeah.
So I think they will be forced to release the votes, the documents, and I think you're absolutely right, Sam. I think they will do everything they can to avoid a vote because it puts the Prime Minister in such a difficult and challenging situation.
Stephen, if there was one, like we heard from the Lib Dems, I assume you and your colleagues will be voting for it. But what do you think? Are you optimistic there will be one or not?
I mean, it's within the gift of the Conservative Party also to engineer a vote, which is an important point in all of this as well, and to really put those Labour MPs on the spot. So that could well happen as well, and we did that before in previous parliaments. But look, we've kind of seen this movie before where a government effectively loses control, and there's almost an inevitability about the terminality of that, because our Labour MPs seriously going to say to the public in the weeks and months to come in the run-up to really vital elections as well and beyond, that whilst the Prime Minister's judgment was so bad he appointed Peter Mandelson, that the public should trust his judgment going forward, and that's a really hard sell right now.
And trust in politics, Sam, is perhaps a bit of a hard sell right now. You know, it is only just over a year and a half. They won a stonking majority, and here we are with these kind of questions being asked.
Peter Mandelson is a 4-decade figure who has bestrode the political scene. He was there in the 80s with Neil Kinnock.
Yeah.
And then he was by Keir Starmer's side and pretty much going on the Labour journey all the way along. For him to be taking payments, personal payments for his husband, which he confirms, and then for him to be hitting forward on emails that have gone to the Prime Minister, we think, and then they go straight to Jeffrey Epstein, a convicted paedophile. In 2009, of course, Jeffrey Epstein had pleaded guilty and gone to jail for soliciting sex from a minor. For him to be doing that, I think, is such a betrayal of trust. The one thing that might help Keir Starmer a little bit in this very difficult moment is that so many different Labour figures' hands have been dipped in blood across years and years and years. It wasn't just Keir Starmer's endorsement of Peter Mandelson. It was a decades-long movement endorsement of Peter Mandelson, and they failed to spot what was in their midst.
You make it sound so Shakespearean, Sam. You really, really do. You should take the stage. More broadly, though, the ramifications for Parliament and trust in our politics have to be a concern to all parties, don't they, Stephen?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we touched upon this earlier. And, you know, there was a lot of talk about the police yesterday, and rightly so, rather than the peerage. But to take it back to the peerage, is it not absurd that we can't just remove him tonight? Is it not absurd that there's an automatic disqualification? One of the reasons why that's really important isn't just to do with Peter Mandelson, it's also to do with Matthew Doyle, Keir Starmer's former spin doctor.
Yeah, who's now in the Lords.
Who's now in the Lords. Yeah. And just a few weeks ago, I was raising huge concerns about his entry into the Lords because he's allegedly maintained a friendship with a guy called Sean Morton, who, of course, is a convicted paedophile in Scotland. And we were rebuffed by the government and the protestations that we were putting forward that this shouldn't be happening. So we brought forward a bill to remove him and Mandelson at the same time. The government could have given us time to discuss this, and they chose not to. And you know that right now they're probably regretting that.
But just to put it back from Labour point scoring against the government, more broadly, like I said before, all parties get touched by scandal at some point, and some more than others more regularly. When we're talking about people outside the Westminster bubble, they'd be shaking their head and just thinking, stupid politicians.
But I think the scale of the news today is really unprecedented. I mean, the amount of revelations that we've had just today, almost a breaking news on a kind of hourly basis, is truly extraordinary. And I absolutely agree with what Stephen just said. I think the government really has got to grip this, and they do need to have some kind of mechanism where they can remove peerages. And ultimately, that's a question about government prioritisation and time. Do they want to give time in the chamber to do this? And they are the government. They can choose to do that tomorrow if they choose to do so. And the point is that they haven't. So the Prime Minister's got to grip it. This story is not going away, and there'll be more revelations to come.
Yeah, as soon as tomorrow, maybe. Theo, Stephen and Sam, thank you very much indeed. Tomorrow's going to be another fascinating day. That's it from us. We're back tomorrow at 7. Sarah Jane Mee is up next.